exploitation, and oppression. So the second wave of feminism provoked extensive theoretical discussion about the origins of women's oppression, the nature of gender, and the role of the family. Now, issues such as rape, reproductive rights, domestic violence, and workplace safety were brought to the forefront in this movement. And there was widespread effort to inform or reform the negative and inferior image of women during the 1960s and 1970s. So, as a whole, the second wave of feminism can be characterized by a general feeling of solidarity among women fighting for equality. It also saw the creation of several types of feminism. So we're going to talk about radical feminism, and that was a movement to root out oppression. So let's look at what the women from the 1970s were all about. So this is, as I said, they wanted to uproot oppression to end sexism, patriarchy, subjugation, racism, ageism, I can relate to that, class hatred, competition, ecological disaster, capitalism, subordination. What wonderful goals. And they were committed to sisterhood, solidarity, equality, and more opportunities for women, feminist politics, peace, love, women's rights and empowerment, social justice and mutual growth, self-actualization, freedom, and reproductive justice. So let's start in the beginning. And the beginning, as many of you can imagine, going back to the 60s and 70s, we had to look to Betty Friedan. And she came out with that wonderful book, The Feminist Mystique. I just happen to have a copy right here. It amazes me. I paid 75 cents for this back in the 70s. Anyway, Betty Friedan had graduated from Smith College. She went to the 15-year reunion and started talking with her former classmates. And she learned that most of these women were kind of bored, and they were concerned, but they couldn't really put a name on what the problem was. And so Betty Friedan did more research. She interviewed more women from her era and really tried to identify, well, what are their lives like? Are they all living under oppression? And so she came up with the book, The Feminine Mystique, in 1963. And she talked about the problem that has no name. And it was what these women were suffering from. They wanted some form of outlet rather than being subjected to living in the suburbs, raising children, and making gourmet meals. So this was the beginning of the second wave of feminism. And she went on to co-found NOW, the National Organization for Women, in 1966. And she founded that with Eileen Hernandez, with whom I actually traveled to Africa with about 20 years ago. And we were giving presentations in Kampala at the university there. She also co-founded the Women's Political Caucus in 1971. She co-founded that, and also NARAL. What a phenomenal, phenomenal beginning of the second wave of feminism. Now in 1977, There was the National Women's Conference, and she was a key player in that conference, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So moving on, the next key player was Gloria Steinem. And if any of you have the opportunity to see the film, The Glorias, I highly recommend it. And it shows Gloria how embracing she was of all ethnic groups. It shows her embracing Dolores Huerta, and it shows her embracing Wilma Mankiller, and you name any ethnic group, Gloria has reached out to them. Now, I just so happen to have a couple of her books right with me. This is a book she wrote about how to really work on self-esteem, which is what all women need to do. And then here's another one of her books, and she was just in San Diego a year ago promoting this book. And those of us who were lucky to get a ticket to see her also had an opportunity to have our picture taken with Gloria Steinem. What a wonderful day that was, and what a wonderful icon she is. She has written 9 books. She continues to speak out. And this movie is really the story of her book, My Life on the Road. What an amazing blessing she is to our society. Okay, another leading player back in the 60s and 70s was Paulie Murray. Now this woman ended up getting 5 degrees. Can you imagine? Those of us who ended after 2 or 3 just applaud her, but she actually became an attorney several times, I might add. She had a master's degree in divinity. She became an Episcopal priest, the first woman, the first African-American woman to become an Episcopal priest. And a year later, they decided to make her a saint. So she is now a saint among her other accomplishments. She was on the President's Commission on the Status of Women under JFK, and she also became part of that, which was an outgrowth of that commission. She became one of the co-founders of the National Organization for Women. She has written several books, just a truly amazing feminist. And one of her books is titled Jane Crow and the Law. And she talked about how the law doesn't really protect women, and specifically, it certainly doesn't help or promote Black women. So this was one of her key issues, to really work on trying to change our laws and our situation. Now, Kate Millett was also very involved in the issues related to education of women, particular higher education. And how do we ensure that women have equal opportunities in our educational systems? And I'm sure Rita can talk to that because of her work working at the university level. Now, Kate Millett came out with a book titled Sexual Politics, and it really showed that in all levels of society, all of our avenues of power were held in men's hands. So men controlled everything. And this really upset Kate Millett, and that was the point of her book. How do we empower women? Now, because she was so outspoken, she was ridiculed. She was certainly accused of raising the ire in many men throughout our country. So she wrote a book called Flying, which she tried to explain what she was all about. And she also mentioned that she was a lesbian, which created another uproar. concerning her. She ended up writing 2 autobiographies and is certainly a mainstay in the second wave of feminism. Now, when I mentioned the importance of education, I had to think about Edith Greene, who was a member of our U.S. House of Representatives. She wanted to become an engineer. Her teachers told her, no, 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 girls become school teachers. So, of course, Edith Greene became a school teacher, but she eventually ran for the House of Representatives. And one of the things she learned was that when she was working as a professor, she was getting less paid than her male counterparts. Can you believe that? Less pay than a man. So that was one of her key issues. And she became known as a mother of higher education. How do we ensure that women have the same opportunities in higher education and also equal pay? And see, that was one of the key issues that came out of the work of Kate Millett also, really pushing. And it was fortunate that we had somebody in Washington who could create legislation to ensure women should have equal opportunities and hope to get equal pay. Another key player back in the 60s and 70s, and she continues even today, is Dolores Huerta. And she, of course, is probably the brains behind the United Farm Workers Union. She was certainly a strong, strong helper to Cesar Chavez. She worked a lot on the boycotts I don't know if any of you remember any of the grape or lettuce boycotts that we all participated in. And she created the expression "si se puede," which we use a lot now. And she also became very involved in pushing to get more Latinas who would run for public office. She spent 2 years just trying to create more enthusiasm among the Latina community to run for office. And we're blessed here in San Diego where we have several fine Latina representatives working on our behalf. Dolores is also in the movie I just mentioned, The Gloria. So again, I'm going to encourage all of you to see that movie. And another woman who was really pushing, now Linda asked, well, what about the Equal Rights Amendment? Well, Alice Paul had written that in 1921. It took until 1972 to get it passed in our Congress. Can you believe that? Why is it legislation related to women takes forever? Anyway, she managed to introduce it, Martha Griffiths, and it did come out of Congress, and then it went out to the states to be ratified, and it had to be ratified by 38 states. Well, as we all know, Phyllis Schlafly became an anti-ERA person and managed to really prevent that from being ratified by its deadline in 1982. Another thing Martha Griffiths worked on was to ensure that gender or sex was included in the Civil Rights Act of 1974. You cannot discriminate in the workplace or in education on the basis of sex, race, color, religion, or origin, your natural origin of where you were born. I'm losing this statement for it. Okay, so Martha Griffiths was a hard-charging legislator working on behalf of us in the House of Representatives. Also during the 1970s, Roe v. Wade was enacted. Pro-choice became the rule of the land for many, many women. And Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey were the two feminists who were really involved in getting this enacted. It's been chipped away at our state level in almost 500 different cases, 5 different pieces of law. Another amazing feminist. Now, she didn't call herself a feminist, she called herself a womanist. And to her, that was being a Black feminist. And so she was promoting this, and she was promoting the rights of Black women and how we can really, really work on promoting and helping Black women create the world that they want to create and the world that's good for all of us. Now, she did create 65 books. Can you believe it? Alice Walker is the author of 65 or more books.
Wow.
Some of them are out of print. Her most famous, of course, is The Color Purple. And she's just continuing on. She's a shaker and mover in the women's movement and continues to really work on behalf of ending oppression. Now, Patsy Mink was working for us in the legislature back in Congress. But what's fascinating about Patsy Mink was she wanted to go to medical school. So when she graduated from college, she applied to 20 medical schools and was refused by every one of them. She then went to the University of Chicago's law school, became an attorney. She went back to Hawaii, and no law firm would hire her. So she ended up creating her own law firm and tried to survive. She went to Congress and she worked on the educational amendments, Title IX. So she's instrumental in really working on the issues that were raised by Kate Millett and Paulie Murray, and of course, all the other feminists who were involved during the 1970s. And at the museum, we're creating a mural, and Patsy Mink is in one of the murals representing the second wave of feminism. Okay, Robin Morgan, another prolific writer and spokesperson for women's rights and for ending all forms of oppression against women. She certainly was an editor of Ms. Magazine, which was founded by Gloria Steinem in 1971. Robin always considered herself a radical feminist, and she really wanted to root out, get to the basis of what's going on with this oppression and root it out. And so that was her key issue. And she did an anthology titled Sisterhood is Powerful. It had 50 different articles in that anthology. And I went through that anthology to identify other feminists during 1970. It's just amazing how many women were totally dedicated to this women's liberation movement. And Robin was also a poet. Lady of the Beast is one of her books about poetry. She also was a founding member of WITCH, which is a Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell. Can you imagine such a name? And that existed for 8 years, and those women were determined to really ensure that women's rights and opportunities persisted. She then went on to do another anthology, Sisterhood is Global, and another one, Sisterhood is Forever. These women were phenomenal, just phenomenal. And another fascinating woman was Shirley Firestone, and they called her quite the firebrand and the firestorm because she was just a dynamo. And she was very involved in the radical feminist movement. And one of her beliefs was that women shouldn't have to go through childbirth. She thought there should be some way to create artificial wombs so that women wouldn't have to go through that pain. So that was very, very shocking back there during the early 1970s. She also did a magazine called Notes from the First Year, and then Notes from the Second Year, and Notes from the Third Year. But she was one of those fiery, in-your-face kind of feminists. In fact, she went to the Ladies' Home Journal office and stood on the desk of the editor-in-chief and just started ripping up issues of the Women's Home Journal. She didn't like the way women were portrayed in that particular magazine. Okay, and another feminist, and she also is in our exhibit at the Women's Museum, and she is quite the artist, the muralist, and the next time I go to LA, I'm going to look for the Great Wall of Los Angeles, which she created with 500 student painters. It's a mile-long mural. What an amazing, amazing woman she is. And she continues to be very active in her organization that she set up for Latinas and Latinos. Another woman involved, Shirley Chisholm, very active in promoting women's rights, and she and Bella Abzug created the Comprehensive Child Development Bill of 1972. As we all know, childcare is a major issue for all women who want to work. It's a costly expense. And so these two women really worked on trying to get this bill passed so we could have federally funded childcare. Richard Nixon refused to sign it into law, even though both branches of Congress totally approved it. We still need that. And of course, Bella Abzug was very active in creating the National Women's Political Caucus. She's also shown in that movie that I keep talking about, the Glorias. She's being played by Bette Midler. Okay, and another energetic and totally dedicated woman, Jo Freeman. She was so active in the beginning of the second wave. She and Shirley Firestone actually were at a conference together, and they just decided that they had to create a publication, and they created a newsletter called The Voice of the Women's Liberation Movement. And because of Jo Freeman and Shirley Firestone, the Women's Liberation Movement became a reality. They created the movement, and they created this journal, Voice of the Women's Liberation Movement. Now, she created The Politics of Women's Liberation, which was based on her PhD dissertation. She published that, and it showed how there were two different types of women's liberation. There was this younger form of it where younger people were more interested in the new age and civil rights, whereas the older group, the women who created the National Organization for Women, were more interested in dealing with the oppression and the issues related to ending sexism and sexist exploitation. Now, she did write a book called Trashing, which showed that women, different women's groups tend to become rivals, so she was addressing that issue. How do we stop that? Okay, my time is running out.
You're okay, Ann.
What?
I said you're okay.
Okay. Bell Hooks really worked on the issue of Black women and feminism. And she actually addressed the issue of intersectionality, which we've all been dealing with lately. That term has become very, very popular. And so she addressed that issue. How do we deal with racism, sexism, and oppression? And so this was her issue, trying to figure out how to survive in our complicated world. And Cynthia Enlow is a pretty interesting feminist. She calls herself a curious feminist. And she actually wrote a book on that title. But she's been dealing primarily with the issue of militarism and the impact of war on women. And women are truly the victims of war. So this has been her key issue. And it would just be wonderful if we could figure out how to end wars and end what happens to women during war. Oh, went the wrong way. Okay, and finally, I just wanted to talk briefly about the National Women's Conference in 1977. What I thought was so fascinating is it was decided to carry a torch from Seneca Falls, New York, where the very first women's rights conference was held in 1848, carry that torch from Seneca Falls, New York to Houston, Texas. And Maya Angelou had written a declaration of sentiments similar to what Elizabeth Cady Stanton had written in 1848. And people along that road from Seneca Falls were asked to sign the Declaration of Sentiments. And then that was presented at the National Women's Conference. Unfortunately, Phyllis Schlafly and her dedicated friends showed up at this conference. They were to vote on 26 different issues. It became very, very polarized. Phyllis Schlafly's group were all dedicated to ending feminism, abortion rights, the ERA, and they certainly didn't want to accept homosexuality. So those women band together and really destroyed what was so promising about this National Women's Conference. Okay, so how do we measure success from the 1970s? What have we accomplished in those 50 years? Have we ended sexism, patriarchy, racism, ageism, class hatred, all the things I mentioned to begin with? Where are we with reproductive rights? Are those safe? What about the Equal Rights Amendment? It's now been ratified by 38 states. It should go into our Constitution. However, Mitch McConnell will not allow it to be addressed in the Senate. It's been approved in the House of Representatives. How are we going to get that into our Constitution? And how are we doing with equal pay for equal work? And as Dolores Huerta was doing, trying to get more Latinas to run for office, how are we doing? Did we make any progress during this last election, getting more women elected to public office? it looks to me as though our work is still cut out for us. I thank you all for listening, and let's keep moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. Si se puede.
Yeah, si puede.
Well, I would hate to have to follow up on that. Fortunately, I don't have to. And that's because Rita Sanchez, equally impressive, as you will soon hear, and her panel will be joining Anne for the second half of the program. Rita, are you ready to tell us about the Feministas?
Yes, we have living PowerPoint. We have 5 amazing women that are going to speak to us today. And if I've missed anything, I know they're going to fill in the blanks. So the Chicanas were entering the public debate on women's rights even before the 1970s. They were forming groups and attending Chicana conferences. Some attended that 1977 National Feminist Caucus, where that one in particular where Gloria Steinem, Bella Asbug, and Shirley Chisholm were present. And not everybody agreed, as people in the movement itself that we're hearing about from Anne did not always agree either. But up to then, we hadn't participated or even been invited by the white feminist movement. So the Feministas, at this battle for equal rights for women, were barely entering the fray, and you're going to see the reasons why. We actually met Gloria Steinem years later, the year 2000, I believe. We were introduced to her by Gracia Molina de Pic, a feminist and activist. Gracia brought a consciousness for justice from her home state in Mexico, and she had been at the forefront of the fight for women's suffrage there just before the women won the vote in Mexico in 1953 when she came to San Diego. So thanks to Gracia, she became a friend and mentor to Chicanas, the Feministas here in San Diego who were coming away to college for the first time, and she spoke to them about their rights as women. The San Diego women you're going to hear today have these stories to tell. Sonia Lopez can tell us more about Las Chicanas at San Diego State University that was formed. She was there in the 1967 where the action was. And Gracia was a friend of Gloria Steinem and did not lose the opportunity to include all the Chicanas, or as many Chicanas as she could, when Gloria Steinem came to San Diego some years later. And then in 1970, Chicanas were actively engaged for women's rights themselves, as you will see. We often speak to one another intently about our own history, but here's an opportunity for others out there that don't know, but Mexican American women have contributed to the women's rights activism here in San Diego in the 1970s. Several other Chicanas at San Diego State University, among them Enriqueta Chavez, who later taught the first Chicano courses there, along with student Olivia Puentes Reynolds and others, attended the first Chicana caucus, or workshop it was called, during the Denver Youth Conference of 1969. So that was where the first Chicana caucus was held. Women can you imagine just getting together to try to sort out what was going on in the streets of our country and feeling apart from it. History shows that Chicanas did not easily buy into the terms of feminism and the feminist movement language that promised to liberate women at first. They wanted to study what was going on in their own lives. Chicanas began to form groups of their own, like the Las Chicanas and the San Diego Chicana Teatro at San Diego State University with Felicitas Nunez and many other women. Chicanas knew about the suffragist heroes, but began to seek out heroes of their own, like Dolores Huerta and Gracia Molina de Pic. Our history was books. So we didn't have a long history that had been already established, like the women of the East Coast. And later we learned one of the earliest heroic figures in our history that we could teach you about in our classes that we did not have that we did not know about before. Her name was Jovita Hidar. She stood up against the Texas Rangers, against racism, and the lynchings that were happening against Mexican people in South Texas. And she believed that women should have rights. And she formed La Liga Feminista. So that's the history of the word that comes to us, to fight for women's suffrage, and so that men and women could be equal, she said. Our history in the US was rooted in the US takeover of Mexico in 1848. Mexican Americans, now US citizens like Jovita, fought for women's rights as early, well, Jovita fought for them as early as 1903. And when Mexican American women were seen as foreigners, even though they were citizens of the United States. In the 1970s, we were putting together our history ourselves, and we were learning about our most basic civil rights built into the US Constitution. Exposés of what was going on in America were also being talked about on specials, on television. It was a radical time, the 60s. Everyone out there that's much younger than us should know. And in 1966, I watched a newscaster by the name of Edward R. Murrow speak to America the night before Thanksgiving. And he said, there's a whole segment of Americans that are going hungry tonight. And that just touched the hearts of the American people and all of us. That same year, we learned that a large percentage of those going hungry and living under poor working conditions were Mexican Americans. We were just learning that we even had rights. We were just surviving at that time. And this was such a special time, the African American fight for justice in the United States. And we didn't know that we had rights under a treaty as well, the treaty of between the U.S., an international treaty between the U.S. and Mexico. Well, one day on TV, I was with my family and I saw Dolores Huerta on TV with talking about Cesar Chavez and the United Farmworkers Union. She had such a powerful voice and she reached the people, speaking out for farm laborers in the UFW. I'd never seen a woman that looked like me on television before, and it was mind-boggling. Thanks to Dolores Huerta and Gracia Molina de Pic and their outreach to the Chicanas that are here today, Linda Legrete, here with us today, will tell you more about that journey with two of our most dedicated feminists, Gracia and Dolores. Linda, she'll be speaking later, talked about the UFW, volunteered for the UFW in 1966. She recalls that year as the beginning of a journey meant to last one summer, but ended up lasting 12 years. San Diego women participated in several different conferences and documented their experiences in the book, Chicana Feminist Thought, that you might want to get a hold of. In the 1970s, the first Chicana workshop was in 1969 at the Denver Youth Conference. I think I already talked about that. UCLA had a Chicana symposium that same year, and Chicana caucuses were being led by first feminist author Martha Cotera at the Raza Unida conference in Austin, where a new party was forming. But they formed a Chicana conference that same year in 1970. The Chicana Regional Conference was held in 1971 at Cal State LA and Long Beach State. So these conferences were coming all over at different universities and different places so that people could so women could gather and talk about their rights as women. The Women's Workshop of the Mexican American National Issues Conference was held in Sacramento in 1970. And it led to one of the most powerful feminist organizations called La Comisión Femenil. Well, in 1971, the first National Chicana Conference was held in Houston, Texas, and it actually renounced the second wave of feminist movement because they wanted the white feminist movement to introduce race and racism. Chicanas felt excluded and as having different needs and concerns and demands. So this is one of the departures that we talk about, but that is later coming together of unity. But all these different areas had to be talked about, and the feminist women had to come to know who Chicanas were and who Black women were as well. Other organizations formed at the time, one of them was MANA, for Mexican American women. It was founded in 1974, and it was established in Washington, D.C. And as an offshoot, it's still thriving today, very much in San Diego. MANA's first president supported the ERA. She said, look, these are the issues we agree on, like the ERA gratification. But there are issues we cannot agree on that we're still talking about as Chicanas. MANA challenged organizations in the feminist movement in other areas like Latina's right to choose, which she said had been abused so many times because it was such a complicated issue for Chicana women. In San Diego, Chicanas had a powerful voice, and they held a march, a conference called CHE, the Chicano Committee on Higher Education, was a historical policymaking weekend for Chicanas. The electrifying atmosphere, this is a quote, the electrifying atmosphere created by 19 state colleges led to the Plan de Santa Barbara, which was very important on higher education to the Chicano people. It demanded Chicana representation and hiring. It demanded Chicana faculty and administration at colleges and universities, and courses to be taught on La Chicana. So these are some of the first women feministas that we look to today. In 1973, I was a little bit about myself. We're supposed to do some talking about our own involvement in it. I was in the small audience standing in the quad at Stanford the day that the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, was passed in California and on in our world. I felt like such a child just learning. I was even captured on TV for the evening news, so I guess I made history that day because of that. And just being there was a radical moment. But I was just learning about what the Equal Rights Amendment meant. As an English major in college and wanting to teach literature to the people, I noticed that my women's literature courses and authors were all British or Anglo-American. And that year I applied for a graduate fellowship in which we had to make a proposal to win it. So I proposed to teach a course on women, and I had no idea that I was going to be the first woman to do that. I won the proposal and then proposed a journal, a student journal, while the students gathered and wrote their own stories. One of the firsts for women, and there are many, many firsts you're going to hear about today. But as Kamala Harris said, one of the first, but it would not be the last. Josie Talamantes was the first time Chicana director of the Centro Cultural, which grew out of demands for space in the movement. So Josie's going to talk to us about the arts and what's important to that about women's rights. Messages and leafleting, everything that was done to reach the people was artist instigated, Josie will tell us. Arts grew at the Ford Center with two women who promoted danza, Senora Herminia Enriquez and Delia Moreno. They were these first women activists in 1969. They taught music and guitar and Delia performed with her two daughters and tried to bring back to us the culture and history which we lost that hadn't been taught in the schools. Charlotte Terry was a single mother with 6 daughters, and she painted for the first time under the Coronado Bridge, where all the men had been gathering and painting murals under there. She traveled, after that, she traveled to historic Chicana conferences, to the United Nations Year of the Woman, the conference in Mexico City. She composed her own songs and she sang them to the people. And she was at the Bicentennial in Washington, D.C. And if you can imagine, these are women that grew up in the barrio neighborhoods, in their churches and homes and communities close by that were in these wonderful places reaching out to Chicanas all over. And B. Zamora has now published a book for children that will tell us more about the importance of the arts to our children and the Chicana contributions to women's rights in San Diego. Tommy Camarillo became the director of the Chicana Park Steering Committee, and Veronica Enriquez became one of the first women directors of the Centro Cultural, and her sister Viviana promoted the dance and followed in the footsteps of her mother, the Ballet Folklorico, and she became the arts director of the Centro. She actually gave performances, and even performances in Chicano Park, which she stood on a huge pole dancing with La Voladoras, a very courageous woman. Women began to run for elected office. One of the first was Lori Saldana, who became an assemblywoman. Then Denise Ducheney became the first Latina senator from San Diego, and Mary Salas has become the first Latina mayor of Chula Vista. All this has taken years of time and struggle. Here with us today, Elvis Salinas is one of our most recent elected officials to the board of directors of the Grossman High School District. Congratulations, Elva. And Nora Vargas was just elected very recently in I guess a close election, but she was the first Latina in 2 decades to win in District 1 in Chula Vista as a county supervisor. As you can see, we have a monumental history of Chicana Feministas in San Diego that have contributed to women's rights in the United States and San Diego. I'd like to introduce the first one to speak, Sonia Lopez. Sonia and I published a book together called Chicana Tributes, paying tribute to all these women. Several of them that are here today, 5 of them that are here today. Sonia's been actively engaged in promoting the interests and political agency of the Mexican people in San Diego for over 50 years. And she's been inspired by her student activism of the 60s and 70s. And she's fought for gender equality. In 1973, upon graduating from Sacramento State University in ethnic studies and education, she was hired full-time at San Diego State in Mexican American Studies and developed and taught the first women's studies course there called La Chicana. And she's authored the article, The Role of the Chicana Within the Student Movement, very powerful essay on La Mujer, in Essays on La Mujer, reprinted later in Chicana Feminist Thought. And she earned her master's degree at San Diego State and began a new career as a high school counselor in 2014. She was inducted in San Diego's Women's Hall of Fame for her activism. Sonia, do you want to talk to us and tell us more, please?
Well, first of all, I like to say thank you to Linda for putting this together. I know it takes a lot of work, and everybody that is part of the presentation, including Josie and everybody else. And I'm going to do like more of a general overview instead of going into details, I guess. I just want to go ahead and give you a little bit of my own background to put things in perspective in terms of San Diego and the book that Linda and that Rita and I put together. I came from Imperial County through the EOP program to San Diego State. And I came in 1968 at the height of the civil rights movement. That's when I met people like Josie. Josie probably doesn't remember. I think you were at City College at that time, Josie. You know, many of us came at that time, and we were not welcome as minority people and of course as women. I think at that time there might have been maybe 50 of us there at that point. So talk about alienation and isolation. Since we came in myself, other people came before me, of course, in 1967, 1966. And those are the people that, of course, I am humbled to say that they were part of the people that began the institution of Mecha organizing, and we became involved at that point. And as part of the involvement was, of course, getting involved in the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement at that point was, as we know, throughout the country, and that included, you know, the Black civil rights movement, the women's movement, the farm workers movement, the Chicano movement. So we came at the right time, huh, Josie? I don't know if it was the right time, it was a blessing or a curse. We don't know, but the bottom line is that people like myself began to not only participate in organizations to bring about change in San Diego State and change in the San Diego community. I became involved with people like Alicia Crow from City College, Olga Castañeda, all these women that were at City College, and they were going through the same experiences as we were as young women in terms of feeling isolated, being part of a civil rights movement in the Chicano movement, and having a lot of experiencing a lot of sexism and oppression and all that comes in that comes in being involved with politics, right? And at every level that you can think of. So we formed organizations, Chicana Voluntarias, that a lot of the women from San Diego City College were involved with, people from San Diego. And since we were part of the student movement, we became involved in statewide organizations. Rita talked a little bit about Che, Chicano Concilio for Higher Education was an organization that brought about El Plan de Santa Barbara. El Plan de Santa Barbara was a blueprint to implement Chicano studies. People like ourselves, Enriqueta Chavez, we became part of the committee of Che, which meant we would work with people statewide to implement Chicano studies in different institutions, including San Diego State. We were at the forefront as young women, as students, and in the process experiencing the oppression, the sexism, the machismo that we had to confront. And we confronted it at the local level, where we were at the state college, as well as in the community level, Chicana Voluntarias, women from City College and different colleges in the area. Because you have to remember, even though we have a history of activism, we as young women did not know about it because we didn't know our history, right? We came into San Diego State. I mean, we were barely surviving and we did not know our history. So we were breaking our path, so to speak. Now, 50 years later, oh my God, we were part of doing history and doing some of the things that we were doing. But at that time, we didn't see it that way, right? It was a thing of survival. Here we were at a university, isolated. So we had to come together, not only to survive psychologically, but also academically. And for myself, I truly believe that I would have not done what I have done in my lifetime if it was not for the support of and working with other women. And we came at a time when the women's movement was taking off at San Diego as well. At the same time that we were establishing Chicano studies at San Diego State University, the Women's Studies program was being instituted at San Diego State. And we worked hand in hand with that department, and it was a mutual support. And all the contradictions and all the differences we were both experiencing in both of the department. But as Chicanas, you have to understand that at that point for us, we had a hard time saying, yeah, we're feminists, because of the pushback that it was not, how shall I say, you have to remember that we were fighting the establishment, and the priority of the women's movement was very, very different than our priorities as part of the Chicano movement. And to identify as saying that you were a feminist, you were, you were called a turncoat, or what is it? What is the word that you use? A traitor, so to speak. So many of us had to walk a fine line, and I think we still do. I think 50 years later, you look at our society. I think that I myself was part of. I taught the first Chicana class at San Diego State. Talk about pushback with machos, and I was accused of everything that you can think of in order for to discredit. One of the beautiful things was that, like I said earlier, people like Enriqueta Chavez and myself, we traveled statewide, that we were able to connect with women throughout the state, and we came out with one of the first books, Essays on la Mujer. Rosaura Sanchez, who taught at UCSD, did an article, Adelaida del Castillo, that was in LA. So we were able to start putting our agenda first, whether it was at conferences, at Chicano Studies conferences, or at the National Concilio de la Raza, where we were trying to make policy for the schools. So it's been a lifelong process, and it still is, because education to me is the key in our community, and that has been my focus, as well as politics in terms of running elected officials, because as Anne knows, that's where the power is, right? That's where you make the policy, and the policies come down to the schools and come down to the clinics and so forth. But it took us a long time, because people like myself that came back from farm worker country, we didn't know our history. We were taught to be ashamed of who we were. So it was a reborn of finding who we were. So it's been a long process. It still is. We had people like Nora Vargas being elected. We have Adela de la Torre, who has become president of San Diego State. But we are a military town. A military town tends to be conservative, and you still have the Phyllis of the back 70s that are still pushing back in who we want to be and where we want to go in women's rights. And women's rights are all women's rights, right? Whether you're Black or you're Chicanas. And it has taken all this time to be able to intersect with each other and still say, Anne, I thank you for women like yourself that has always been there. I didn't know you, but I am thankful that it's been people like you that have worked so hard to bring us at least along where we should be going. Right, Josie? I think I can talk forever.
Oh.
Is my voice coming up, or Linda?
I am going to unmute everybody. I hope. Everybody, you have the option, I think, that you can unmute yourself now. If anybody is not able to, send me a chat message so I can see why, but I said unmute everybody. So if you see the little red microphone, you want to click on that in the, it should turn, oops, white, I believe.
Is that coming out there? I pressed chat. Do you hear me?
Yes.
I do hear you, yes.
Oh,
yes.
good.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say that when Sonia talks about we didn't know our history, that isn't her fault or our fault. Our history was dismissed from the history books. And after the War of 1848 and that invasion, we lost our history. We were recovering our history in the 1960s and 70s in the Civil Rights Movement. So thank you for that, Sonia. And Sonia's also, you can find her on the website and the archives at San Diego State University. And she talks in an interview, and she talks about our connection to the women's rights movement. And even though it seemed like a huge struggle as we speak about it, the unity that's achieved in the end is amazing. And thank you for bringing that up, Sonia. And then we have Linda Negrete, was one of the first Chicana leaders to bring on awareness of the UFW, the United Farmworkers, to San Diego. I first saw it in film when I first started teaching at San Diego State in 1974. And I was amazed that we had this history to tell. And I showed it in my classroom. Her mentor, Gracia Molina de Pic, encouraged her to spend a summer volunteering. And remember, I said it was a summer that lasted for 12 years. Well, as a result, Linda has worked closely with Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, and Gracia Molina de Pic, one of her greatest mentors, and we'll probably hear more about. And she's best known today as a founder of the Cesar Chavez Service Clubs in San Diego, where she reaches young students to learn the values of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, to pass on Cesar's life and honor his values in over 50 clubs formed in San Diego city schools. Linda, tell us about it.
Okay, so hi everybody, and thank you Linda and Rita and Sonia and Anne. Thank you for the brief history of women's names who some I had forgotten about. So thank you for that. You know, before I say anything, I just want to say the work is obviously, we're not done. I mean, it's so cyclical, and when you think that you've just made some inroads, things happen. And, you know, bad things happen. I mean, you know, just, so I am so proud to be in this conference with women who have accomplished so many things. But the truth is, you know, we all know it, we have a lot of work to do. So, and honestly, just this last 4 years has even made it more obvious that we have so much more work to do. So I touched on all of the things of all of the people that you talked about earlier, Anne. So yeah, so Gracia Molina de Pic was my 5'2" Spanish literature teacher at Mesa College right after high school. And Gracia invited Carlos, my husband, and I to join a social club at Mesa College. Long story short, it was a way to bring people together, but her real love was in politics and in community activism. And so one of the things that she suggested that we get involved with was the Farmworker Movement. And she said, you could, along with a bunch of other people across the state of California, go to Delano, California, and take some food and clothing to striking farm workers. And so we thought, okay, we'll do this, you know. So we had been doing good work, you know, not causing any good troubles, but good work, like in Tijuana, painting orphanages and doing that kind of stuff. And it was great, and it made us feel good, and it made other people feel good. But our hearts really were in making change. And so when Gracia offered us that opportunity to go to Delano to help, or to meet some of the striking farm workers, that's really the point in our lives that things changed for us. And like Rita said, our our commitment was great. Our math was horrible because we were going to stay for one summer and it lasted for 12 years. But honestly, it has been the best 12 years of my life when I think back at what we learned, because, you know, when you're in the college atmosphere between those buildings, it's a different kind of education, which is important. But honestly, my real education was on the streets and out in the communities talking with people. So it's just really nice to have a combination of the two. When we first got to Delano, that very first trip, and met with all of the other students who came from different parts of California, our first meetings were with the Filipino brothers, who, by the way, were the first ones to walk out on strike. Everybody always thinks it's the Mexican farm workers, but it was the Filipino brothers who walked out out of the fields. And they were so inclusive, and they were so wonderful and warm. Many of them, even at that time, were older and they were still working in the fields, but because of the discrimination laws, they were unable to marry white women in this country. And so many of them didn't have children. So when we came to bring that food and clothing, they embraced us like we were all their grandchildren. It was really wonderful. And we ended up having an amazing relationship with them then until most of them died, because most of them did, because that was like over 50 years ago. So, so one thing led to another. I mean, there was, as Sonia mentioned, there were so many different, there was a women's movement, there was the walking of the schoolhouse, the Chicano movement, the Vietnam War. There was so many things going on in the country at the time. And our focus, our path, our calling was with the farm worker movement. And so in just in a brief moment, and you know, you can ask questions, I guess at the end we'll ask questions, anything you'd like, but I'm just going to say that those 10 years in that movement, in the administrative offices and in the service centers where we worked, I honestly did not feel that there was an issue with women and men working. And the reason is because Cesar Chavez was a feminist. He really was, because Cesar he always said, if you wanted something done, give it to a woman, because, you know, she was going to make it happen. Cesar had an enormous amount of respect for women, his wife for sure, and Dolores for sure, two strong women that flanked him. I mean, every step of his way. So he didn't have a choice, really. So because of that, he always, always involved women to do everything, tasks. And you did it because you didn't want to say to Cesar Chavez, I don't think I can do this, or, you know, you wanted to get it done and get it done right because he believed in you. And that's important, because years later, when we developed and co-founded the Cesar Chavez Service Clubs, we took that same philosophical philosophy to our young students. So it wasn't until we moved back to San Diego, when I was out in the other world, did I feel what everybody's talking about here, because I really kind of I had a lot of confrontation with a lot of my men friends and peers, because they just didn't, I don't think they knew any better. So part of that thing was just honestly this, and I swear to God to you guys, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a thing that came out after Joe Biden was set and Kamala Harris were, got elected. And there's a thing that says, make sure to wear your shoes, ladies. The glass is everywhere. I don't know. But
Yeah.
ask your men friends, ask your husbands, for those of you who are married, what that means. And I swear to God to you, you're going to find out they don't know what that means. So, I mean, that's just another example of, a lot of work to be done. So it was out here back in the city where I got my education on having to be tough, and especially around men. And I always just had the philosophy that I'm a sibling of there's 7 of us total. I was the middle kid. So I had 2 older brothers and a sister, and then 3 younger brothers. So I was around boys. I grew up with boys my whole life. So my 2 brothers were good guys who taught me a lot of stuff. My 3 younger ones, they were little boys, and they were a challenge. And so I got some sort of education, you know, working with little boys at that time. So as I grew up, I just kind of figured, you know, if something is happening to you personally, or somebody says something, or somebody is not being inclusive, and it happened all the time at events, at conferences, at forums and stuff, there were always men who were being sort of like the ones who were the pillars of the events, right? The speakers. This was like before the 70s, and even after, actually. But I always, you know, thought it's really important to tell these guys. You're doing them a disservice if you don't tell them that what they're doing is not right. And, you know, some of my good men friends, I mean, we got into, you know, fisticuffs, not physical ones, because, you know, we teach nonviolence, but in verbal discussions about how, you know, how dumb that was, really, that you're not including women in the process, you know. And moving forward, I mean, the thing that angered me personally the most was the equal work and not getting paid equally for that. That still drives me crazy. That would make me want to forget my nonviolent belief, you know, and just want to kind of move forward with that, because that is just ridiculous. So, but I had to tone myself down. Carlos and I co-founded the Farm Workers, the Cesar Chavez Service Clubs. And the beautiful thing about that is that I've learned that American history that's being taught in school needs to definitely be revised. That Latino, Chicano history, Black history, women's history, you know, all of that's not really included. They get mentioned, you know, every now and again. But I know with our curriculum, with our kids, we delve really go deep into, you know, issues about what's happening in the world, social justice issues, races, institutional racism, all of that with our kids. So they're getting a little bit of that, but the really important thing about it, especially for our little girls, is we tell them, and we only have a few minutes to talk about this here, so it's there's really a lot to, you know, to be talked about more deeply, but we always tell our kids, boys and girls, that your voice matters and you have to use your voice. I mean, Josie Camon's talked to one of our Chavista groups, middle school kids, which are really tough. But, you know, in the end, we tell our kids almost at every meeting, remind them, we have a deep respect for public servants. But honestly, Sonia, not to disagree with you a little bit, but for me, that's not really where the power is. The power is in the community, because we hire those people and we have the power to fire those people. And so we always tell our kids that we respect what they do. We want to develop relationships with them when they do something good. Let them know, but when they do something not so good, you've got to let them know. Because if you don't do that, they're going to continue to do, you know, and they might not be taking care of the situations that you as a person or you as a community need to be solved. So, you know, it's good to have an open conversation with those elected officials, because they learn from people in the community. So that's, you know, and there is power there, but I mean, it's not the ultimate power. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, so I just wanted to say that, but
Linda, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We are almost out of time right now. I have this forum reserved until 3 o'clock. We're supposed to end at 2:30, but I do have it till 3. So if people want to stay and maybe try and limit to 5 minutes, because we did have some questions from the audience that I wanted to get to. Maybe I could do that right now and then we can decide. But
what's happening to Josie? Isn't Josie going to speak?
Yes, what I'm saying is that we were running out of time though. So maybe try to limit it, and then I'll hold off on the questions if we don't get to them. Hope you understand. Well, it's 3:20. We 2:20. We only have until 2:30. But I do have until 3 o'clock.
If you guys want to just skip me, because in the 1970s I was in high school, and I really want to hear from the rest of the ladies. So I just skip over me.
Oh no. It's nice to see you, Elva.
Well, no, next time to add more time for this. There's so much to say. Go ahead, Rita.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us about those wonderful events that you went through, Linda. And that Josie is a Chicana trailblazer who defends and preserves cultural history. She's responsible for Chicano Park being listed on the National Register of Historic Places. She was born and raised in San Diego in Logan Heights, and her family histories thrived there for over 100 years. In 1970, as a student at City College, she participated in the first demonstrations to save the parcel of land that has come to be known as Chicano Park. And she's been dedicated to it ever since. From 1979 to 1981, she was the director of the Centro Cultural de la Raza. And from there, she was on the State of California Arts Council as a community activist. Please talk to us, Josie. You have so much to tell us. And I love your background image. I'm just in awe of it.
Well, thank you, Rita, and thank you everybody for the wonderful historic lessons and all the things that has been shared. I will say Linda Legrete is one of my mentors, and I will, Sonia, you mentioned Alicia Crow. I think Alicia Crow and Augie Escamilla from City College were instrumental in my development with regard to putting me forward and receiving a Ford Foundation scholarship to go to school beyond City College. However, I didn't know anything about it. You know, I got those letters from all these high-end universities all over the United States, and I would just put them in a drawer. And activism at City College, I will say that when I first started going to City College, I was pretty quiet, just trying to figure out what I was doing. In my home, it was pushed upon us that we had to go to school, we had to get an education. And I really didn't think too much about the women's movement during that time. My main role model was my mother, who was an activist, union organizer, and a giver to the community. She was a cannery worker, and she would fight battles left and right. And plus, I was raised by 3 male brothers. I couldn't even learn how to drive unless I knew how to change a tire first, because they didn't want me depending on a man to do it for me. So, you know, all that kind of training was ingrained in me. So I didn't think too much about the women's movement. As a matter of fact, I think, Rita, when you were talking about, and something B. Zamora said to me earlier was, you know, just too focused on survival and really protecting our own communities and giving voice to our communities to think too much about the women's movement. I know that some of my women colleagues at the time kind of harangued me because I used to hang with a lot of the Vietnam vet guys that were coming back and a lot of the local organizers from here in Logan Heights. And we got along just fine. And it was primarily because I knew how to hang with men because I had these 3 older brothers. And I really didn't take much quote unquote crap from any of them. I never made coffee. I never ran, you know, what they wanted me to do. So I just kind of kept doing what I thought what I was supposed to do. So with regard to the women's movement, I mean, I knew that while I was at UC Berkeley, that I really needed to get out of school to come back to the community to apply my education. And I remember a mentor I had there, Dr. Arnaldo Solis, who was the first Chicano psychiatrist in the nation. He kept asking me, well, why do you got to hurry up and go back to San Diego? And I said, well, I've got to go back. That's what I've got to do. And he says, you know what? He says, you may never go back. And I was like, aghast. You know, what do you mean I'll never go back? And he says, you may end up staying, you know, in different places. So you have to apply your experience and education wherever you're at. And, you know, it lit a fire in me. And, you know, we don't have much time to talk about all the things that, that I was involved in at that time, but we did prior to what they call now, I think it's early academic outreach, we actually started a program while a student at UC Berkeley to provide tutorial services to Raza in West Berkeley at the time, going into the homes. And then working with the Royal Chicano Air Force in Sacramento, which is taking a giant leap forward. Again, a lot of men, but I didn't have a problem with them because I wouldn't take any of their crap. And we were dealing with, a lot of it was farm workers, equal education, serving the community, and providing artistic and cultural education. And that's where I excelled, because my focus initially was to go into counseling or mental health services. But when I saw the power and the impact of the arts and culture in terms of impacting our community with a positive reinforcement of who we were, and utilizing those talents to educate the community through posters and silk screening and murals, I stayed there. I knew that the written word, poetry, I knew that documenting our communities, I knew that the arts would have a broader impact on the development of the community than me fighting for women's rights, which I didn't know where I fit in that. Again, it's even something I still struggle with regard to the women's rights movement. I agree with all the issues, but I, for some reason, did not apply myself to be involved in that struggle with the women, because I didn't see it for me, because I had my own voice and I had family that backed up my voice, so I didn't question it. But I knew others had problems with it, and where I saw the issue becoming a problem is when I would apply myself and step in and stop it. Again, I don't want to take up a whole lot of time, because I know we need to get to questions. With regard to listing Chicano Park on the National Register, even though I lived in Sacramento for close to 30 years, I was in San Diego at least every other month or every 3 months, because my mom and my family was here, and I was still part of the Chicano Park Steering Committee. As when we took over Chicano Park that night, we formed the Chicano Park Steering Committee. And so I was still very connected. So when Pete Wilson issued the edict of retrofitting bridges and spans after the Northridge earthquake knocked the freeways down, I immediately came down, because I knew it would affect the park. And I met a gentleman in Sacramento by the name of Dr. Jim Fisher, and eventually brought him down. He was the cultural historian out of Caltrans. And when he got involved, looking at his job was to go to places and look at the cultural resources to see if they had a legitimacy and were significant enough for preservation. And after he did the assessment and met with many community members in San Diego, he said, I promise you, he says, when I write my report, it will not, it will support the bridge, the park, and the murals. And then he calls me back probably 9 months later and says, hey, I had to compromise. And he goes, but I didn't compromise on the park or the murals. He says, I compromised on the bridge in terms of significance, so that it could be retrofit without having to deal with what they call the 106 federal regulations. He wrote the document that became, that had Chicano Park listed on the California Register. And then he turned to me and said, you need to get it listed on the National Register. I didn't even know what the hell a National Register was. And so I began researching and working. We did it, we got it, it went forward. Took me a long time to do it, not because of the work, but the community didn't want it. Took me about 14 years to convince the community to go forward, which we did. It was approved in 2012, December. Everybody says January, but it was January. But then I worked with another guy, Manny Galaviz, and we co-authored Chicano Park and the monumental murals to be listed as a national landmark. So I don't want to spend too much more time other than to say the next venture we're working on right now is the Chicano Park Museum and Cultural Center that'll focus on art, history, science, and the Cultural Center will be responsible for activities, events, cultural events, and currently we're working with Herbert Sigüenza, who is one of 3 members of Culture Clash. And anybody's invited if you want to participate. He's doing an artist in residence, and we're going to have to do it virtually because of COVID, but they will be collecting histories of the community, and then eventually the participants will put together and develop playwriting skills as he'll take him through that process. And then at the end of the residency, he will do a performance with the students and participants. And if you're interested, go to ChicanoParkMuseum.org, www.ChicanoParkMuseum.org. You'll see a form on there where you can contact Herbert and be part of that. And then I guess I'll leave it there for questions.
Linda, or would you like me to introduce B?
B.
Would you like me to introduce B? Can you hear me?
May I speak? I just think that you're running really short on time,
Yes.
and I'm fine if I'm not part of the presentation.
I was
a lot and enjoyed listening to all these wonderful women.
I signed up to go to that.
There's a lot of, all the information has been just fascinating. I'm learning a lot. The problem is that this is going to just cut off at a certain point.
All right. Do you have questions for the women?
Oh, okay. Sounds great. And then we're going to do the call tomorrow, right? At 3.
Is that
okay? Hey, thanks a million, Van.
Somebody needs to mute.
Somebody needs to mute themselves.
Okay.
I will just say that in the chat, I did list information on how to contact me and if people want more information about the children's book. But other than that, it's been great. Thank you.
It's been awesome. So there was another question here.
Linda, can you hear me?
I can.
Would you please read a couple of the questions from the audience for the women, please?
Yes,
Thank
I was
you.
just looking for that. Well, the first one was already answered about where to get the book. And then is Cindy Medina still with us here? She wanted to know about what.
Yes.
Yes, I don't know if did you see that question that she had about the organization that you were talking about? Let's see, where was that?
Now, I was looking for resources on how white women and POC women have unified forces in the past. I need more examples of that so we could apply those same techniques now.
Can you hear me, Linda?
Yes.
Well, what I'd like to say, and anybody else can speak after that, but it's kind of one of the things I wanted to close with, was that the unity that we were seeking in those days, and that was such a struggle, didn't end. We have found that one of the most important things is to unify and to form coalitions with all kinds of other women. And I think it's most dramatically pictured when we all marched after the president was elected 4 years ago, and we marched in the streets against sexism and violence and abuses of women by him that were documented. And the women marched for all through San Diego. So I hope that helps. It's just a start, but that's one of the elements of unity. And if any of the other women want to speak, of course, you're welcome to do that. While I've got this voice here, I just wanted to say to Josie and to everyone here that Josie said, well, she didn't really get involved in the women's movement or think about it very much, but Josie is the role model for activist Chicana women in San Diego. Josie was the first woman director of the Centro Cultural de la Raza. And then, of course, she was responsible for what she did, making a historical site of Chicano Park. And now she's a founder of the Women's Museum of San Diego. That shows that women are powerful, and Josie is one of the biggest role models that we have. Thank you, Josie.
Thank you, Rita.
I'd like to respond to the question really quickly to the young lady. Back in the day at San Diego State, I would say in the 1970s, Chicano Studies did work with helping the women, the white women that were involved in the women's movement, in helping institute women's studies, because Chicano Studies came first in terms of negotiating with the administration and so forth. And so when they were trying to establish their department that included Carla Kirkwood, I remember very well, and they in turn supported people from women from Chicano Studies. I believe that it was through women's studies that we were able, as Chicanas, to open a daycare center for Chicanas at that point, because there were women that were single moms, or even some that were married at that time, and that there was no daycare center for at that point. And remember, at that time, part of the women's movement was about access to birth control and things that confront women. And we did embrace some of those ideas, even though it was not popular for us to do that at that point. And when we did have Chicana conferences that we put together with women from City College, part of the workshops were access to birth control, or we called it health, a workshop on health, but it was talking about birth control access, having the right to choose. And we depended on a lot of the women in the Women's Studies program to give us information for leaflets or whatever. So we made it a point to try to work together. So those were some of the examples that I can recall at that time. I hope that answers your question.
And this is so amazing because there were 500,000 women that marched on Washington, D.C. after the president was elected. And in San Diego, there were 40,000 women that marched in San Diego. But if you don't mind, because I feel like we have to say something about B. Zamora, because she was invited to be here today, and that just to tell who she is, and maybe she'll have a chance to say a few words. For more than 30 years, B. Zamora has reached countless numbers as a dean of counseling and student services at Southwestern College. These are the role models that are so needed for younger women, to see these Chicanas here, these Feministas, as leaders, and to know that they can do it too. And I've watched her be a counselor, and she is absolutely amazing the way she reaches the youth. Added to that, a life-altering experience with danza Azteca, danza indígena, led her to a deep respect for her indigenous Indian heritage and culture that she now awakens in others. And it's so important to her that you can feel it in her spirit when she dances. And recently she published the book, The Spirit of Chicano Park, the People's Park of the 1970s. And so her voice continues to reach the people of her community with pride, action, and change. Would you say a couple of things to us, please?
Sure, I'll keep it short. But, thank you, Rita, for that. And well, you mentioned the Women's March right after, 2016. And yeah, our women, and I was one of the women leaders, we led that march with the prayer of the dance. And it was such a beautiful experience to bring all these women together and not just women, but men as well, but mostly women from all different cultures. And I can just say, I was also in high school in the 1970s. and got involved with the Chicano movement. And like Josie said, you know, we didn't truly connect with the women's movement because we were involved with survival. And for me, I consider myself to be an educational warrior as well as a cultural warrior. And I've always chosen the kind of work in education that allowed me to help those students of color, those students that were first generation to college, that really needed those role models. And I did that at Mesa College with you, and you were there, Rita, and then also at Southwestern College for many years. Along with that, teaching and preserving these ancient traditions, I believe has given our movement a spiritual strength and base, that we are all connected to, that we are all brothers and sisters. And so I continue to teach that dance tradition and live in that way. And I guess I think when I think about myself as an activist, I would just say, I'm just someone who has a need to speak the truth. And for me, the truth is that all people should be respected and that they are valued and worthwhile. And the new book, the Chicano Park book, Josie was a big part of that, as many others were. And this represents the history of this beautiful park. And it's told through the eyes of an elder woman, La Señora, and it's bilingual. And the proceeds from the sale of the book will go to help the Chicano Park Museum and Cultural Center, and as well the Chicano Park Steering Committee. So I listed toltecapress.com is a place you can purchase it. It's also available on Amazon and all the other traditional ways. Thank you for including me today.
Yeah, B, I also, this is for you, B, I also coordinate the local author program here, and I don't see your book yet. So please register and submit your book so we can get it in the library here. Anybody,
Yeah.
all of you had to have a book out there, please, by all means, let me know about that, okay? And we'll try and get it out there. And again, I'm sorry, this is gonna probably just go blank in a little bit because of the time. Not my fault, it's been awesome, and feel free to keep going till it goes if you like.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much for doing
It's
this.
been my
It's just
pleasure.
been so stimulating for me and for all of us, and to see everyone, as Bea says. And
Yeah.
you know, if I don't know if Elvis Salinas is here, but I just wanted to say, if she is, or even if she isn't, when Trump was elected in 2016, there was a lot of disappointment and demoralization for women, a lot of women. And so what happened is that's when Elva won the election. And so we invited her and as many people as we could think of just to gather to find something to celebrate. And I don't know if you remember, Elva, but we celebrated you that day. You won that election. Elva just won the election a second time by, it looks like by a large number, to the Grossmont High School district. And she's so needed there because for years there was not a Latina or a Latino in that space. Elvis Salinas is the KPBS local hero and activist for equitable education and humane immigration. She's a retired professor of English and Chicana Studies, Chicano Studies, and she now serves as the first Chicana Latina trustee on the Grossmont High School Board. And she believes that education must be transformational and culturally relevant. And I think that came out with Josie's talk and what Bea said. So thanks everybody so much. I just feel hopeful and invigorated because of you. And thank you, Linda, and the San Diego Public Library.
My pleasure. And we have one more of these events coming in the Centennial Series. It's going to be December, trying to think off the top of my head, December the 9th, I believe. It's going to be December the 9th, and it's going to be called Looking Forward, I believe. And we're going to have the director of the library, Misty Jones, is going to be here, and a couple of women from, one woman from UCSD in the communications department, and a woman from San Diego State's Women's Studies Department. And we're going to talk about what the future is with feminism. And you know, it was interesting when we put it together because we didn't know who was going to be the president. So it could be a completely different conversation. But fortunately, the conversation we're going to have, I think, is going to be a better one. So please look forward to joining that. It'll be posted soon in the event calendar.
Is Elba out there? Do we see Elba?
Yeah, she's still here. Maybe she can speak a little bit.
Where are you, Elba?
Oh, I'm here. I don't know. I'm here.
Oh, there you go.
Zoom.
There you are, Elba.
Tell us something.
Yeah.
Tell us something.
Tell me something good. Okay, let me think of something. You know, I had a whole presentation ready for you guys, but you know, I learned a lot today. I'm very excited. I didn't grow up in San Diego. I was born in San Diego, but I grew up in New Mexico. In New Mexico, where Rita is from as well, in the 70s, we did learn about Chicano power through a lot of our cousins that lived in Los Angeles. I grew up very poor, so I didn't have a TV. So we didn't have a phone either. So it was basically just really depending on the Cheeseman network, and which worked really well in our community. I did work a lot on the Vietnam War stuff, wore the POW bracelets, wore the Chicano power insignia all over the place, and did all of that. But so I don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to say thank you to all the folks that came before us. I do feel like I did learn a lot. One thing I learned that really was like an aha moment for me is that I always wondered why these young Chicanas that we have out there now are way more fierce than we ever were. They're so much more fierce. They're so empowered. And I thought, why, you know, I was so meek and mild and scared and all that stuff. And I thought, you know why they are so empowered? Because of the women like the rest of you that did all the work in the 70s, and they did learn their history. They did learn their history. We did not learn our history. I didn't even read a Chicana author until the 80s, I think, probably. And so we really stand on the shoulders of women like Elizabeth Petita Martinez, Gloria Anzaldúa, Ana Castillo, and many, many, many others. So I just want to thank you guys for having me here today. I am the first Latina ever to be elected to office at the Grossmont Union High School District. There's a lot of work to do there. I had a list of the things that I've been working on, but believe me, I'm in there echándole ganas. Buenas tardes to all of you, and thank you for all the work that you do.
If I can I just put a little bit in there for you, since you're an elected official and you're on the school board? You know, to me, bringing in the culture to validate our young people. So I hope you tap into people like Josie and to be Zamora, you know, bring the danza, because I mean, that really, you identify, it makes you so proud, and our kids bring with them so much knowledge with our culture. Thank you. Sorry.
All these women are in this book.
I think really important too is that we have to look at, right now we have a 2 to 3 board, and it's really hard to unseat the folks that are there in those particular areas. I am in East County, folks.
I know.
So I just want, that is a huge situation over there.
Oh, I used to live in La Mesa.
That deserves a double congratulations, man. That's tough. That's a tough one, Elva. Good for you. Congratulations.
Congratulations, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Linda. Thank you, Linda. Nice seeing everybody, Josie.
Bye.
We got to hook up, Sonia.
Thank you, everyone. Great presentation. I learned a lot.
Nice to see you, Inez. Congratulations on your new gig.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Linda and Anne. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. It's been another great, successful program. We have learned a lot.
Your book on Chicano Park. And so we lent it to a little 5th grader who came over and asked a bunch of questions, and then he made a presentation to his 5th grade class and shared the book. So it was really wonderful.
That's awesome. Is that book in, Linda, is that book in the library, do you know?
I know the book is at the Logan Heights Library. They bought a couple of copies. Is that where you're at?
No, I'm at Central. What's the title again?
The Spirit of Chicano Park, El Espíritu del Parque Chicano.
Okay.
And Linda, I do want to talk with you about the book because I think that I might be able to donate some books to your program.
Okay. Yes, let's definitely talk. You could do an email after this or something, but yes, because it was just published this year, so we definitely want to get you to have some kind of event or, you know, get
That would be great.
Yeah.
It's just with, you know, with the pandemic, we haven't been able to do some of the things we would like to.
It's becoming more and more like this is going to be the new standard.
This is our new world.
Doing the Zoom, and you know, I don't know about you, but I kind of stumble through it every time there's something else that is like, oh, that's how that works. So I appreciate all the patience that you guys have had as we go through this as well.
Thank you, Linda.
Linda, what day is, would you repeat what day the December event is going to be, please?
It's going to be December 9th. I think it's a Tuesday. The 10th is Hanukkah, so we wanted to do it before that.
And what time?
It should be at 6. This one's going to be a little bit later. It's going to be 6 to 7:30. Okay. And I did a crowdsourced poem from our local authors from 2019, and everybody was invited to send a verse in. It started with looking forward, I believe, and talking about the feminist movement. And so people from the local authors, because their books didn't get, they were kind of, you know, they lost out because of the COVID. So we thought we'd do this, and I had 20-something people submit a line. So when we start the program, everybody's going to say their line of this big crowdsourced poem, and then we're going to start talking about it. So
I did all of the Zoom presentations for North County League of Women Voters.
Oh yeah.
Election season. And so if there's ever a time that, you know, that I learned by Bath by Fire.
Right.
You learn it in front of a crowd of people.
That's how, yes.
If there's ever anything I can do to
Oh,
help.
You're so kind, yes. And I have your email, if you registered, which I'm guessing you did.
Yes, I did.
Then I will have your email, and I'm going to send you out when somebody had requested a list of some of the books that everyone had been talking about.
Yes,
and that Anne had
question.
Yeah. So we want to get, that was in the PowerPoint, I believe, or they wanted to, I have to go back to it. I can save the chat, and I can save the film itself. It's going to take a little bit before it actually gets posted, but it will be posted on the Centennial page. And
this interview?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll have it out there. And I will also go back through the chat and find out what we're going to put in this bibliography, this list about some of the people that you guys were speaking of. And I can put that on the library's catalog as a list that anybody could access, but I could also share the link of it with you guys if you're interested. Yeah.
What's nice is like with I was on a Zoom meeting this morning with North County AAUW, and they did a program similar to this in a way. And so I can do screenshots as it's going through of the PowerPoints, and that was really nice to get too. So
yes. Well, fortunately, Anne sent me her PowerPoint, so I have it. So yeah. That'll definitely help. But thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the PowerPoint. That was beautiful, Anne. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great, Anne. Your usual exemplary,
yes.
Fantastic, wonderful presentations. I'm a big fan of Anne's.
Fan of Anne's. That's the club. Fan of Anne's. We're all fan of Anne's.
Okay, so Linda, you've got my email. If there's something that I can do to help along the way with Zoom, give me a whistle.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll pass the word on to the League of Women Voters people about the December one also.
Yes. Nancy, okay. How did you find out about this program?
I've been following whatever Anne touches.
Okay.
For a long time, and I knew she was in this, so I figured out a way by knowing what Anne is into to be able to sign up for this. And this is the first one I've attended, and it's been great. But I would really love to pass the word around
Yes.
to a bunch of friends I have in North County. So, I mean, is there a limit to how many people are allowed?
Well, you might know that more than me.
So are you doing a Zoom, or are you doing a meeting or a webinar?
We're doing just what we did right now.
Zoom, no?
Zoom, yeah.
A meeting. So you probably have the package that is 100 people. You can
It's
buy
a government package.
Yeah, the main package.
The
So
government
that
one.
Your limit will be 100 people. You can buy it for larger, but right now. And I noticed this morning, I was watching how many participants, and it looked to me like there was some, you know, it fluctuated like right around the 25 to 30 range.
Yeah.
But I think you could probably get up to 100, and especially now, I think a lot of people would really, you know, we have more people attending Zoom meetings in League than we used to have coming to a regular meeting.
Yes.
Because I ran Zoom sessions teaching people how to use Zoom, and somebody commented that we have more people coming to our general meetings than we had people coming to our annual meetings. So anyway,
that's one of the benefits, reaches along.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I hope to see you guys. Anne, I know I'll be seeing you in December. We'll talk about that one soon.
Okay,
thanks again.
And it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Bye, Anne.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Sonia. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome. It was good to see you again, Sonia.